G'day everyone and welcome to another edition of Tuesday Night Live brought to you by CrowCast. Lots to talk about after our great win versus the Bulldogs, so let's just not carry on any further. Let's get straight back into it, shall we? Good evening, and welcome again to Tuesday Night Live. This Tuesday night, the 26th of April. Apologies for running a little bit late. That was unfortunate, but nothing I can do about that. There probably was, but I don't want to say. G'day, Pete. How you going?
I'm good, mate. Yourself?
I'm very well rested, thanks. Oh, goodness me. Never mind.
You certainly sound alive and kicking now.
Do I? Well, that's good. It's probably you know what they say. You know what they say about like rabbit in the headlights. That's how I'm feeling right now. All right. Look, mate. What did you think about the weekend? It was a fantastic win, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was one of the absolute best, wasn't it? Really, given all of the circumstances and given where they were playing. So,
yeah.
Unfortunately, I missed a bit of it. I was travelling on Saturday, and I saw the first, third, and last. I missed the second, but I got 3 out of the 4. And that was outstanding, absolutely outstanding. So it was. I think just following on from the week before, the sort of situation where you're challenged and the team's challenged, and they lost the lead in the last quarter, and that capacity to sort of grit the teeth and come back was really good to see, wasn't it?
Oh, 2 weeks in a row now. And it's a really good sign because last week was good enough against Richmond at home. You've got a bit of crowd and a bit of momentum you can build, but doing it away against last year's grand finalists, you can't really ask for a lot more than that from a team, can you?
No, you really can't. It's a big win, and I thought that in patches, again they played some really, really good football, and that forward line just functioned so well. I mean, I know that there was some issues with goal kicking, but it looked like it was a little bit choppy out there, and it was difficult for both sides. But the forward line just functioned so well, and I think that we have to really take a hat off to Billy down back, don't we? Because he's just a bit of an architect back there, isn't he? He's an old-fashioned sort of that sort of key defender architect that just seems to. He's not a dour sort of one-on-one defender, is he? But he really sets us up, and he takes the game on. He runs and he delivers, and he's doing some real damage back there, Feen.
He is. The whole defence played really well. Macca was wishing for Billy to add some aerial capabilities to his bow in order to be a complete defender, and he certainly delivered that on the weekend. Just a ridiculous game. I was actually quite shocked that he didn't get top votes in the coaches award. He came second to today, and I thought Tom had an excellent game as well. But I just felt Bill was key in defence in stopping their tools from getting off the chain back there.
And look, he's got plenty to do, but he hasn't even played 30 games. And so he's got a lot, and certainly he's only played a handful of games in defence. So there's a lot of coaching to come for him as well, and particularly with his one-on-one. And that's all craft that can be taught. Yeah, and he can improve that. But the stuff that he's showing that he's got is not necessarily stuff you can be taught that well. He's showing great. Capacity to read the play, and so take the game on, and he uses the ball well, and so there's a lot of skill and a lot of talent that he's showing at the moment, and I think that he's been criticised, and I think fairly, for the fact that he does have to improve that one-on-one game, and I think that we're used to seeing guys like Talia and Rutten and those kind of guys back there. but I think that's something that is coachable. And, they just got to. I mean, the whole thing is that 200 centimetre guys that play like that don't grow on trees.
No.
And so they've got to stick with him. They've got to give him now, a good long block of games. And during that time, and I'm sure they have been, just continue coaching him to get a little bit better on the one-on-one stuff.
Yeah. Look, and one spring does not a swallow make, but you want to see him against the likes of Harry McKay and, those big power forwards just to see how he's going to go. He struggled a little bit at times aerially against Richmond. But
I think though that don't forget we've got Geordie Butts, who is much more the dour defensive kind of player, and so probably it's not a bad 1-2 punch. That Billy kind of gets back to help out a bit, but Geordie really is that one that takes that defensive one-on-one against the key, the opposition's best key forward.
I guess the litmus test will be Geelong, won't it? With Hawkins being a handful for Butts, and then Jeremy Cameron, you'd imagine, would fall to Billy, and he's fairly mobile and strong, Jeremy Cameron. So thankfully there's not too many teams with that sort of forward firepower, but that'll be a very interesting...
McKay and Curnow, as you mentioned, McKay and Curnow, those two you mentioned before, and that'll be a really big test. So, the test is still to come, and, I was just saying before that we were 3-3 this time last year. So we've just got to... It just seems to be a little bit more steel about it at the moment, doesn't it?
Well, I was saying to Mac and Nikki on the weekend that we're building a brand, Pete, and the brand is just relentless hard work, never say die attitude, and the ability to just be frenetic with that frontal pressure. From an individual character point of view, that seems to be what we're looking at. The game plan that Nix is starting to introduce now is also interesting, because we're seeing blokes like McHenry and Murphy get a little bit different role, get a little bit more involved around stoppage and play higher up the ground, and we're seeing the forward line a little bit more open as a consequence. And I thought that was actually key in us keeping their midfield fairly quiet. A few of their blokes like Dunkley, etc., got a fair amount of the ball, but they weren't allowed any sort of freedom, and I think that's because we seem to be having most of our numbers between the two arcs, and it's looking quite good at the moment.
Yeah, and he always spoke about Lachie Murphy before. He had another really impressive game, I thought, and he's having a really, really good year. But also, obviously Tex is a massive presence, and what your thoughts are there? I reckon there's no reason. The way that he's playing at the moment, the position that he's playing, and just the condition he's in, I don't see why he wouldn't go for another couple of years even after this year.
Well, I was only saying that to a mate today, actually, that the way he's stripped fit this year, and even at the beginning of last season, there's certainly, it looks like there's another season left in him. I think, it's very early to make this call, but and I've been a bit of a G for giving Darcy a bit of a run, but I think Darcy's had that run now, and as far as I'm concerned, he hasn't taken advantage of the situation, and Tex is looking not only as fit as he ever have, but he's also impacting games, and like you rightly say, he's a direct cause of a couple of our wins. So I'm with you, mate. He can do a Tommy Hawkins. He can go until 35 if he likes.
Yeah, and we're seeing it more often now with Hawkins and Franklin and these guys, all just playing out of the goal square basically, and just just continuing to stay in good nick. And why can't they go to 33, 34, 35?
Well, this is the thing.
They stay injury free, and they.
Yeah, I did think, I don't know about you, Pete, but I felt like when the game started on the weekend, for about the first 10 minutes, Tex looked a little sluggish, and I thought, oh, what's going on here? But that certainly changed. But just for a minute, I thought, he just looked to be running in mud. But he came good, and had an impact again, particularly that shot at the death when it mattered. from an angle where we'd missed a couple of easy ones out the front.
Yeah, it seemed like it was going to be an impossible kick.
Well, that's right, and for him to slot it under that sort of pressure, and as soon as it came off his boot, you knew that it was just it was perfect. It's like, all right, the guy hasn't lost his skills. So a lot to like from Tex, and Himmelberg, at least, even though he was quiet by the standards of the last couple of weeks, he still played his role, I think, and had a couple of key moments.
Yep. No, I mean, I think that if you look towards selection this week, it's hard to see any changes, isn't it?
I wouldn't think that. Yeah, you wouldn't think that there'd be any forced changes. I wouldn't have thought. Now, there was a little bit of a cloud over someone. Now, who was that?
Haley had a bit of a limp.
That's right.
We'll see how he comes up. But provided he's fit, I'd certainly hope that they'd give him a block of games and give him a chance to show what he's got. Don't see any point in the yo-yoing that goes on, but they have done it before, so I suppose it's not beyond the realms of possibility. But I'm hoping that he gets his block.
Yeah.
And he wasn't awful. I think I read somewhere he only had about 60% game time. And he had 13 or 14 touches. So I mean, they're just obviously easing him into it. So hopefully over the next few weeks we can. I think that we're probably at that point where we do really need to see. I mean, he's done everything that he can do to earn his spot back in terms of his sandful footy. So I think there comes a point where you've just got to have a look and say, well, is he going to make it or not?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's absolutely no point, Pete, in dropping him if he's fit. He just needs a block, like you say. We need to find out. He wants to be an inside mid. I think the club want him to be an inside mid. He's got all the physical attributes to be very handy in that position. He started promisingly enough, and obviously his form in the twos has been solid.
Yep.
We just have to. I mean, that's the whole purpose of the rebuild, isn't it? We've got to give these blokes a run, and so I'm with you. I think he needs 3 or 4, and let's just see how he goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you've got a kid like that that's come into your team and you still want a game like that, then there's no reason you shouldn't then carry him the following week at home against GWS.
That's right. In terms of injuries, we might as well go through the rest of it. The one that probably had everyone on the edge of their seat for a while was Riley Thilthorpe in the twos. Came off halfway through the game in the twos last weekend, complaining of knee soreness, and the club rightly took a very precautionary role there. The scans come back pretty clear, so it looks like he might have just some general soreness or maybe a slight PCL, maybe you'd think, or medial or something like that. But I'd be surprised if they didn't give him the week off just as a precaution this week.
Yeah, I'd be very surprised. I mean, I think they said they're going to list him as a test, but that would be absolutely bonkers to play him on the weekend in the sandful.
Just no point, is there? We're just on Riley. It's an interesting conversation with Himmelberg and Tex doing well, and Lucky Gallant being showing a lot of promise. Long term, what do you think our forward structure is with Riley?
Oh, look, long term, I think that he's a player that rotates through there, but I don't think he's a permanent. I've never really seen him as a permanent forward. I think he's got too much to offer around the ground. So I see him as a player that will basically be almost like an additional on-baller, I think, but will obviously have spells up forward just to try and catch the opposition out. But just at the moment, I'm pleased with what they've done because they've stuck with Gallant to give him a block of games. I think that he may well have struggled to hold his spot next week. I mean, if you look at the stats, Riley had only 4 possessions but 2 goals. you'd have to think that he would have had another 3 or 4 goal game, which would have been 4 on the trot. And I think that Gallant may well have been under significant pressure next week to have held his spot, and because Gallant would have had his block of 4. And I think that, but I think obviously now with Thilthorpe probably resting, that Gallant will get another week.
Yeah. Inquisitor makes a good point on the chat too, because the wild card in all of this has been Shane McAdam. Come out of nowhere and hasn't done himself a disservice with his performance. Hasn't been dominant by any stretch, but has looked engaged, has done work defensively, and has got involved on the scoreboard.
Yeah. So I think that he stays, but I think longer term, it is a tricky one, because really longer term, I'd like to see, Riley sort of playing around the ground with spells up forward. I guess it's a question without notice, and I can't quite sort of in my mind, I can't quite fit everybody at the moment. If Himmelberg plays well, if Walker plays another 2 years. If Gallant comes on, if McCann, they're all. So there's a mix there to be had. I'm just not quite sure off the top of my head what it is, but Thilthorpe was in good enough form that I feel certain he would have got a recall sooner rather than later.
Well, didn't he get about 20 touches playing predominantly up the ground a couple of weeks ago? I think.
Yeah, he's potentially Fiend. When he's a mature 24, 25-year-old 100-game player, he's a potential, 25 possession, 3 goals kind of a game player. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's that kind of player, and you're mad. Anyone would be mad if they think that he's just going to stand in the goal square. They're just not going to do that. He's just got too much talent.
Well, I don't actually think that plays into his wheelhouse. I don't think he'll ever be a hustle-bustle, strong power forward. Like in terms of a pack marking forward. I don't think that's his go. I could see them playing Elliott deeper, and Riley having a more up the ground sort of roaming centre half forward, bit like your Nick Revolt kind of role. Elliott hasn't got bad wheels and he's good below his knees, but I reckon he's more the type that'll give you a contest in the air, based on current form anyway. Give you a bailout target inside sort of forward 20, whereas Riley's your roaming gun centre half forward type who's going to get ball out on the deck as well as in the air, and with Gallant or Shane McAdam there as a wild card marking option, and with our current configuration putting smalls at their feet with Rochelle and McHenry and Lockie Murphy, etc. There's a good mix of strengths, if you know what I mean. Everyone's got a slightly different strength in that makeup. So I think there is room for Riley in that forward line, but it will take a little bit of a rejig, I think, and a lot, I think, depends on Tex's longevity, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on. I think that there's no competition, for example, between Himmelberg and Thilthorpe. I think they're two entirely different roles.
That's the way I say it.
And I would not in a million years want Thilthorpe anywhere near Himmelberg's role, because he's just going to end up with busted shoulders. Yeah, Himmelberg is a good, he's actually he's got a much sort of stronger, bigger frame, and he can take those. And then you've got Gallant and McAdam, who would they just fly at anything, and they would cause defenders nightmares, because they're not necessarily guys that can be zoned out, if you know what I mean.
No, that's
they just
right.
seem to get to a position and fly, and then of course you've got some good kids at the bottom as well. So on the ground, so yeah, you're right. It's a good configuration, and I think that there's room for all of them, because I think that people underestimate Riley's mobility and his agility, and I think that he can be a very, very damaging player further up the ground.
Some people say that he's a ruckman. He obviously can ruck. That would put him in the sort of the Brodie Grundy category, I guess. Any sniff around that, do you think?
I think I see him very much, the like for like for him in the AFL at the moment is Luke Jackson at Melbourne.
Mm.
And if you look at the way Melbourne use him, he has time up forward, he has time relieving Gawn, he has time around the ground. He's just all over the place.
Yep.
And I think that Riley's are probably a year or so behind Jackson, and unfortunately we'll lose a bit of time with injury now, but that's the kind of player I think that he can become.
Yeah. All good stuff. You could see him potentially being almost the dominant Max Gawn type.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's certainly mobile enough, and Max Gawn doesn't come across as the most athletic bloke, but by God, he covers the ground and he takes a grab. So if we end up with someone like him, I'd be pretty happy.
Absolutely,
Go, mate.
Go on. Sorry. No, I'm done.
You done? All right.
Yep. I'm done with that subject, sorry.
Yeah, on the other side of the injury list, we've got Andy McPherson still carrying that hamstring. He's due for a test. Zach Taylor's a couple of weeks away with his broken thumb. Seed is an ongoing, obviously, and reports, I think it was one of the other podcasts on Twitter mentioned that Seed has been seeing physicians in Melbourne. So he's progressing, I guess. So good to see he hasn't given up the fight. But the longer that goes on, the more you're looking at a Paddy McCartan situation. And Sloan, of course, with his knee. So not a long injury list by any stretch. It's good to have so many to choose from. And relief that Riley isn't amongst them. Just talking about the wider or the broader AFL, I guess. What do you think of the vision with McCartan on Anzac Day, Pete?
I didn't have any kind of too sort of emotive thought about it. I thought that it was a little bit invasive.
Yes, I guess I think that's what I was getting at.
But is that what you're getting at? Yeah, it was a little invasive, I think, but I thought that the AFL's tweet of thoughts and prayers and love hearts, and I think that was a bit over the top. But no, I think it was a bit invasive. He was in the change rooms. You'd expect to at least have a bit of privacy there. But
isn't there a duty of privacy?
What was that, mate?
Isn't there a duty of privacy? Like the change rooms have always been a little bit sacrosanct, and like we've had a couple of instances this year now of blokes with injuries that have been filmed in the change rooms. I don't like it. I don't like it at all.
No. I assume the AFL have permission, or the media, I should say, has permission from either the club or the AFL to have their cameras in there, and then they just pick up whatever they'd have someone monitoring that all the time, like a security camera, and trying to pick up whatever the hell they can, whether it's, players groping asses or, picking up papers or, doing whatever. They just try and make something out of it, which then opens up a whole different topic of AFL media, which I detest with an absolute passion. It's just not a big enough game for the amount of media that we've got, and they're just continually trying to make stories out of absolutely nothing. It's just an abomination, I think.
Yeah. I feel terribly sorry for Paddy McCartan, and obviously he was distraught when he was ruled out of that game with the concussion tests, and by all reports it wasn't a bad one, and he may have just got a bit stressed doing the test and messed a couple up. But with his history, you can't blame Sydney for being extremely cautious.
No, of course not.
I don't like that sort of reporting. I just feel like there's no real place for a camera inside the change rooms. It'd be like having a camera inside the doctor's surgery when I got to have my prostate exam. Pete, no one needs to see it, mate.
Oh dear.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I said. But look, a couple of other bits of injury news. Brody Grundy, of course, has a PCL. I think he's out for at least a few weeks, and Ashoka, that's medical, not Rule 3, mate. So you probably need to learn to read. There was someone else too. The ruckman from Carlton. What's his name again? He's out too.
Perrottet.
Yeah. So Carlton are in a bit of strife. They've lost a couple, and might just be coming off the boil a little bit in terms of their early season form. Who was it for Essendon? There was someone for Essendon, wasn't there? That
watched the game and I can't remember.
It was Darcy Parish that had an ankle.
Right.
But yeah, thanks, PJ. But yeah, he's been cleared, so he might even front up against Western Bulldogs this week. So yeah, so a few blokes dodged the bullet. Speaking of dodging the bullet, Buddy obviously bumped an umpire on the game on the weekend. He got a fine.
Didn't see that one. Right.
O'Meara has been given a $2,000 sanction with an early plea. Franklin making contact with the umpire. Blah, 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 blah. Incidental. Didn't constitute a reportable offence. That's in the Trent Cotchin jar. So he obviously gets off scot-free. So not a lot happening there from the weekend. Just on match review and umpires and all the rest of it. And we spent a little bit of time on this on the weekend, and I'd probably give it about 2 minutes, Pete, I reckon. But is the game becoming unumpireable, or are the umpires just not good enough?
I think that what's happened is that the AFL have, in trying to what they're trying to do is that they're trying to enforce a trickle down policy by overcorrecting the actual product itself.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. So they're curing an evil that's not really there at AFL level, but it is there at the grassroots level, and I can promise you it's there at the grassroots level.
Mm.
And so I don't agree. I agree with the thought process behind it, but they've got to come up with a better way to deal with the situation of umpiring at the junior levels, and the consequent shortage that's occurring, and also the fact that the need has now doubled with the girls. So we need more umpires, and we've got less people doing it. That situation is not going to be cured by dishing out 50-metre penalties for putting your arms up. And it is, at the moment, what they're doing is that they've elevated the umpires to such an extent that it is very, very difficult now to decipher whether you're watching, footballers being umpired or umpires with footballers running around them. And they've, with watching football on the TV, it's almost unwatchable now because of the constant yelling. So they've got, the fact that they're mic'd up.
Yep.
So you're consistently having to hear them speak. And I mean, in the NFL, where the umpires are mic'd up, they might once, 2 or 3 times a quarter, they might just put the microphone on and call a decision.
Well, and they do that specifically because of the type of game it is, and like plays or penalties are called at the end of a play. So they're not interrupting play or anything like that. They're actually calling the decision.
The other thing that's happened, this is not the umpire's fault or the AFL's fault, is that the game has changed insofar as we have now a lot of hold possession, and what that means is you have now a massive amount of uncontested marks. And so you just as a watcher, as a viewer of the game, it is just constant whistling. All you hear is whistling.
Yeah.
I reckon at the start of one quarter of the Anzac Day game, I reckon I counted 8 whistles in the first 15 seconds.
Yeah.
By the time they bounce the ball, then they've got to call it back, then they've got to blow time on and blow time off.
Yeah.
And then there was a free kick. And then from the free kick, there were 3 uncontested marks. And so there's just this constant whistle and constant umpires calling out. And so as a viewer, you're just so distracted.
Well, you're drawn
It's
drawn
maddening.
to it, aren't you? Yeah.
Mm. So
yeah, look, I'm with you. I remember back in the day, the best games were when the umpires weren't noticed. And that's not a mantra that the AFL are operating under now.
No, they want the umpires to feel loved, and it's just and they're trying to set an example for kids and parents, but it doesn't work, and so they've got to find a way to deal with the umpiring crisis at the grassroots level, without interfering with the game. Because in the end, what's happening is that people are just hating on the umpires even more. It's not really their fault.
And I think that's the bottom line. And again, we spoke a little bit about Victorian desire to kill an ant with a sledgehammer sort of thing, and I think this whole dissent thing is coming at the issue from completely the wrong angle, because you can't legislate against people showing emotion. And there's a difference between the famous Brian Taylor footage where he just about loses his mind and has an aneurysm, versus a bloke that puts his arm up in the air, or has a bit of an expression on his face. And the problem is that it's too subjective, and the same with just about every rule that we have in the place at the moment. Everything is subjective, and I think the first thing they need to do is just umpire the rules. Just apply the rules. No degrees. It's black and white. You either pushed him in the back or you didn't. Doesn't matter if you pushed him a little bit or a lot. If you pushed him, you pushed him. If you had your arm over his shoulder, it's around the neck. Doesn't matter whether it was just a brush or whether it was a clothesline. It's around the neck. I think that's the first thing they need to do. And then if they, as a consequence of that, find that some of the rules are too draconian, then they maybe, as a step 2, they need to then look at some of these rules and tweak them a bit, particularly around holding the ball, etc., etc. But until they remove the grey areas and the interpretation from the situation, people are always going to be screaming at umpires, because you and I could be watching the same play, Pete, and we'll have 2 different opinions on a decision that's not black and white.
Yep.
That's just human nature. That's just how we are.
None of what they're doing is going to stop a dickhead parent on a Sunday morning yelling and screaming at a 14-year-old kid who is umpiring their kid's football game.
Yep.
It's not going to stop that.
No.
And they have to find another way to stop that. And they have to be dealing with the rules at SANFL junior level. And whether that is, awarding, wiping off scores or doing whatever the hell it is that they need to do, but that's where they need to do it. Not tinkering with the AFL game, because what happens, Fiend, and I've spoken about this for years, is it's just the basic rules of cause and effect. And so what happens is that when you tinker with a rule, that will create an alternative game, and then that creates another problem, which they then have to bring in another rule to cure. And this has been going on for I don't know how many years. And so we've now reached, I think, crisis point where they've just, the AFL have basically just disappeared up their own arse.
Yeah.
Because they've just created so many rules to try and change something that has evolved because of a rule that they changed previously.
Well, exactly. I mean, let's have a look, and we spoke about this again on the weekend, the unrealistic attempt thing. Now, I was saying to Macca on the weekend that there shouldn't be a rule called unrealistic attempt. The rule is pushing the back, and it's always been, up until recently, that if you went up for a mark and you went up a bit early and you didn't take the mark after having put your knee in some guy's back, that's pushing the back. The rule is pushing the back, or interference, or whatever you want to call it, not unrealistic attempt. unrealistic attempt, then again, it's open to interpretation. One person's really like Shane McAdam going for a hang is far different than 90% of the rest of the AFL world going for a mark, because he's got the ability to stay up there. So you can argue that him going up early is not unrealistic, because he'll take 50% of them. So, you know, I was having a look at a couple of SANFL games the other day. One of the best things they did was remove the deliberate out of bounds rule.
Yeah, exactly.
And just turned it into, you know, last touch rule and all the rest of it. And that is the way I wish that they would handle the situation at AFL level, because the SANFL, by doing that, have just taken a contentious rule out of the equation. That rule was open to interpretation. Was it deliberate or was it not? And now it's a pure and simple black and white. And there's no more argument, and there's no more, you know, baying for blood from the supporters, etc., etc.
Yep.
You know, but you're right. The AFL tried to make rules like the stand on the mark rule. It just blows my mind. It's so.
I mean, it's just horrendous. Just horrendous. I mean, Fane, I was watching the Anzac Day game, and really, really good game brewing. And with, you know, there's like 11 points in it with maybe 5 minutes to go or 4 minutes to go. And then Grundy gets that 50-metre penalty for what? Because he faked a kick, and of course the player moved, and all of a sudden Grundy just gets a goal.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
The game's gone.
And then on the other side of the coin, Peter, you've got...
Why did I sit there for 2 hours and watch a game?
Yeah. Well, now on the other side of the coin, you've got Cody Waitman that basically ran so close to the guy with the ball, who was it, Geordie Dawson or whoever it was that had the ball at the death in the Crows match, that he just about could have reached out and flicked him over the ear, and 3 umpires were watching and just ignored it. You know, and that could have had a just as big an impact on the game had things worked out a little bit differently. Had, you know, Tex not kicked that goal because. So I mean, but just
stupid things like when Luke Hodge conceded. Remember when Luke Hodge conceded all those points in the grand final?
Yeah.
And then the following year, they decided then that if you conceded a point deliberately, then it was a free kick in the goal square.
Yeah.
So then a whole lot of teams got penalised, you know, giving away crucial goals. Then they decided that was no good. So then they made it again. They went back. They've now gone back to an umpire's interpretation about what's under pressure.
Yeah.
How do you possibly umpire that? You know, what's it considered to be under pressure when you cannot concede a point? It's just unnecessary.
Oh, it's completely unnecessary. It's getting, like you said before, it's getting to crisis point. And I think there's 1 or 2 umpires that aren't great in the system, but you're going to get that. There's 1 or 2 players in the system that aren't great either. You know, that's just the way it goes. But it's getting to the point now where I feel for umpires, because there's just too much to go on. There's just too much to watch. Too many things to consider in a split second. You've got to make a call.
Yep.
You know, we all laugh at Dwayne saying noise of affirmation, but there's no doubt that there's an impact from crowd noise and home ground advantage, etc., etc. So the only way to mitigate all of those effects is to make the game easier to umpire, and the only way to make it easier to umpire is reduce the rules and make them black and white. The best thing they ever did, Pete, was bring in hands in the back rule, and the worst thing they ever did was get rid of it. I don't know why they got rid of it, because I didn't hear anyone really complaining about it. Once it was in and people got used to it, it was actually a good rule, and there was no argument. You put a hand on the guy's back, it's a free kick, the end. And then all of a sudden, I think it was Hocking decided to get rid of it and put in stand on the mark instead. Unbelievable. Yeah, Inquisitor Hawkins complained. Yeah, that's right. He would have kicked 100 fewer goals. Anyway, look, let's not go on about it. But I think, to finish it off, I think you're 100% right, Pete, that the problem at AFL level is completely different to the one associated with getting people involved in umpiring. I think they're 2 different arguments. I think they're 2 different issues. And I coached junior footy for 7 or 8 years, including at under 8 and under 9 level, and like where you stand on the ground and umpire these kids and coach these kids while they're playing. And you're right. Some of the parents deserve a bullet between the eyes, and there has to be more done at that level. But unfortunately, there's just not the resources at that level. There's not the resources. The clubs are running these junior zone competitions on the smell of an oily rag with volunteer people running whole entire leagues. There's just not the resources to police it enough, unfortunately.
Well, the sample now, the sample via the sample juniors, they've taken over all of those, odd bod associations that used to control all of the junior leagues.
Yeah.
So the SNFL they now control junior football.
Yeah, but not at primary school level, though.
Well, not at school level, no.
No, that's what I'm saying.
At club level.
At club, yeah, no, I agree with that. But at primary school level, it's still the individual SNFL clubs that run the leagues. And I can only speak from my experience with Sturt, that there was a lady down there that used to run those primary school leagues, which is where it all starts, Pete, at primary school level, year 5, 6, 7. And she did a fantastic job. She organised SAPSASA and development squads and all the rest of it, but she wasn't getting paid a cent. And it was rife back then because there just wasn't the resourcing. She's run Auskick as well, I think.
But the question they have to ask themselves, Feen, is that I know plenty of young boys, because they can umpire from the age of 14. Now they can go out and they can earn themselves $60 a game umpiring an under-8s game at club level, right, for 40 minutes work. Right? No tackling, basically just call marks and, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And they could do 3 games in the morning. They could earn, probably almost $200. Thank you very much. How's that for a part-time job for a 14-year-old kid?
Yeah.
And
right.
They'll do it for one season and they'll never go back.
No, that's right. They won't. Won't.
That's the question that's got to be answered by the various associations. Because it's not money.
No, it's not money.
There's plenty of money. There's plenty of money and there's plenty of training.
Yep.
And so there's opportunity and there's pathways and there's all that stuff. What they have to ask themselves is that how they can better, control, parents that are watching these kids. Diabolical, but anyway.
I mean, it's a whole different cast, and we could go on, and maybe one day we will. Suffice to say, they've got to make it attractive for these kids beyond just the money. And I think the AFL, look, personally, I think the AFL, who have now basically by force taken over grassroots footy, they're not putting enough money into it. I think the SANFL forget what the numbers are now, but it's bugger all from the AFL because we're a heartland state. So the amount of money that gets poured into junior football in Queensland and New South Wales compared to the amount of money that gets poured into junior football in the heartland states is chalk and cheese. I think I remember a number like $400,000 for junior football in the state, and it's just inadequate. And the clubs who are running these leagues at primary school level, they're left to pick up the can, and it's just they don't have the resources. It's just I don't know.
I could debate that one for ages, but I guess we should move along because I'm a little bit.
You're under the pump
late start
because I left hanging. Well, we're just about finished up anyway. We got GWS on the weekend, mate.
Yep.
The first time we probably started favourite for a few weeks now, or for a few months now.
Yeah, a long time. Probably, a long time.
They're the ones that are usually dangerous for us. So, what do you reckon? Are we going to back it up 3 in a row?
I am going to back him this week. I backed him against the Tigers. I wouldn't have backed him last week, but I would back him against GWS this week for sure.
Yeah, I think so.
They're pretty injury free, as you said, and they're pretty settled. And when you get a settled lineup like that, you can get on a bit of a roll.
That's very true. Now, Vardy, thanks for reminding me. We have tickets to give away. Now, Pete, if you need to go at any stage, just go.
Mate, I am going to go just because I'm a little bit past my use by date. So
thanks, Mrs. Peter J, for letting him off the chain for a little bit longer.
No worries. Take care, mate, and good to chat. And hope you all enjoy the game on Saturday.
Thanks, mate. We'll keep going with the ticket giveaway. So if anyone wants a double pass to the Crows v Giants game this weekend, please put your name, only those people, put your name in the tickets channel on Discord, and we'll keep going for a few minutes because we've got a couple of people that would like to have something to say. So, where did... JD Quizzle, you wanted to have something to say, so I'll bring you in. And in the meantime, if you want tickets to the weekend and you can use them, don't put your hand up, or don't put your name in the channel if you can't use them, please. Stick your name in there and we'll do a bit of a draw in a minute. Mate, how you going?
Yeah, good, Feen. How are you?
Yeah, good, mate. Nice to have a new face talking on here.
Yeah,
what do you got to say?
First time.
Long time, first time? That's what I said.
I'm glad you got the first sort of straight off the bat. You guys talked about Billy Frampton because I thought he was probably the story of the game on Saturday. I just want to put it to you. I know that you and probably Pete as well have been a bit more fans of Nick Murray in terms of that position, like favouring Murray over Frampton, but I think relatively recently you sort of said that you kind of want someone who can win their position rather than Billy. Maybe he can use the ball a bit better, but you want that second key defender to be actually beating his opponent.
Yeah.
But I just reckon when there's a good mix down back, obviously we've got Geordie Butts, who's kind of the Daniel Talia or formerly the Ben Rutten down back. He's going to generally beat his opponent, we think, or we're backing him in every week.
Yep.
Tom Duday, he's kind of our, more recent times, Jake Lever. And I want to go back to even 05-06. I feel like Duday is kind of our Nathan Bassett, kind of the third man up that can
definitely
come across the front. And I just reckon Frampton's got a little bit of Nathan Bock about him. I just don't think that he's quite there in terms of being an All-Australian centre-half back, in terms of shutting down a Nick Riewoldt type. But, I just remember Nathan Bock, with ball in hand, you just knew that he was going to hit a target. He never panicked. He could hit up a short target. He could hit a 40-metre kick on the 45 or go into the corridor. And I just think Billy brings that. And if he can kind of add to what he's done in the last couple of weeks and just get a bit of confidence, he's only 25. Murray's only 21, so he's giving Murray a few years. But I just feel like it's worth persisting with Billy at the moment, just for balance down back. What do you reckon about
that? Look, I think it's very unfortunate for Nick Murray that by accident or just circumstances, he had a couple of really bad games disposal-wise, which opened the door for Billy, because I think prior to that, the general perception was that he was a far more competitive beast in the air and better able to combat a tall forward in that regard. I think what we're starting to see, though, and your comparisons to that Ben Rutten sort of Nathan Bassett era with Nathan Bock is an interesting one, because I think what we're starting to develop now is a bit of a team defence setup. And if you remember back in the day, each of those individual players that you reeled off there were good in isolation, but they also worked very effectively as a team. And the amount of times you had Bass coming in over the top with that big left hand fist, it was quite integral. And so I think what I enjoyed about Billy's game on the weekend was the fact that he actually took some marks. He affected some spoils. He wasn't out of the contest aerially. And then we saw his value on the deck at ground level, which gave us a little bit more more of a dynamic field coming out of that back half. If he can remain competitive in the air, then he's the answer at centre half back, in my opinion, mate. The question will be is if a couple of coaches test him out by trying to isolate him. That'll be the key. If they try to channel forward entries through Billy's opponent, it'll be interesting to see how he copes with that. Because to be perfectly honest, I thought the Bulldogs played into our hands a little bit with their forward 50 entries on the weekend.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think back if we look at the 05-06 side, they were the Crowbots, weren't they? They were incredibly well drilled, and we had a pretty handy midfield back then as well. So that kind of helps to dry up what the defence has to deal with as well. And obviously our midfield at the moment is not quite there yet, and our defence either. We're not that well-oiled machine that we were back then, but we've got to we're obviously trying to build towards having a good structure, and I think you're right. Like if they can all play their role, and if the coaching staff are smart enough to kind of negate any opposition coaching tactics, I think Billy's got a future. I'm glad that we kept him on. Some people were calling for him to be delisted, but to be honest, he's a mature body. He's 200 centimeters tall. He's got some skills, obviously. No other team's taking him, so he's perfect as a backup. Even if he's not our number one, if he can be knocking down the door, pushing for selection, I'm all for that. And maybe Murray's not the answer. He's got a few more years to come along, but maybe someone else comes along, whether or not it's Borlace or someone else like that can come in and kind of Fisher McCasey put a bit of pressure on the key position defenders. I think Billy's he's going to be a bit of an asset for this year at least.
Yeah, look, mate, I think so. Certainly the way he played in the last sort of game and a half, 2 games. I'm going to be interested to see how he goes up against Geelong, particularly because we're playing him down there in that cesspool. That'll be a real litmus test for him. But look, mate, all power to him. He's going well, and that's all you can ask him to do. Mate, a lot of people commenting on the quality of your work, and I find it interesting that whenever we have someone in that's new, the chat really lights up. I just wonder whether they're maybe getting a bit bored of me and Pete. But I do appreciate you coming on, mate, and having your say. So if I had a Sammy's gift voucher to give you, I'd give you one. But Mac and Nick's all of those whenever I get them. So.
No Bro Hotel $50 voucher or anything?
Unfortunately not. But good on you, mate. Thanks for listening and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, all good. I'll call another time. Thanks, Feen.
Good on you, mate. Thanks. And ladies and gentlemen, it's as easy as that. You too can come on and sound like a genius. And look, to be fair, it's not hard to sound like a bit of a genius up against me. So if you want to make yourself look good, come on. We've got a few minutes, so if anyone else has got anything that they'd like to say, then feel free to stick your hand up. In the meantime, who have we got here in the tickets channel? We got PJ, we got Cat Attack, we got Dominic, and we've got Brad. So that's 4. So let me just bring up my little random number generator. In the meantime, oh, here we are. Look at this. I'll even put it on the screen. Hang on a sec. In the meantime, I don't know how anyone else's tips are going, but mine are horrific. I started off well again, but then just fill in a hole. Now, what's going on here? Yeah. Bear with me 2 seconds. Just make it pretty. Alright, so PJ is 1, Cat Attack is 2, Dominic is 3, Brad is 4, Dominic's out, so he's back to 3. Thanks, Dominic, for commenting when I asked people not to. So it's out of 3 of you, 1, 2 or 3, so we'll just make that 3. And we will generate. And it is Brad, 97, who gets the tickets this week, mate. So I'll drop you a message after the show, and we can organise those tickets to come out to the game. So congratulations. Sorry to PJ and Cat Attack, but there'll be chances every week for home game tickets, as everyone knows. So hopefully next week we'll be able to, or next home game we'll be able to give someone free tickets again. All right. Did I just chuck up the tipping just quickly, just to finish off? Probably. Only because I'm going so badly. So, at the moment, a lot of people got 8 on the weekend, and Harry's just starting to eke out a little bit of a lead there, 41 points, 2 in front of a few on 39, Kirk, Elvis, Terry and Brett. And then we've got Cast of Thousands on 38, Nadine, Romy, Barry, Jamie, Craig, Claire. And for those who are interested, I don't even make the first page, I don't think. No, I don't make the first page. Where am I? Oh, God, there we are. 74 with 4 I got right. 4. That's because the Hawks did me in, the Bombers did me in, the Crows did me in. Who else? One on, I think, the one on Friday night as well. Anyway, so I suck at tips. I always have sucked at tips, but I guess, got to be around it. So I'm still negotiating with the club at the moment to get a prize for the tipping comp. Now my camera's frozen, so that probably tells me it's time for me to bid farewell. Thanks to everyone who was listening and on Discord and also on YouTube. Thanks also to people who support us on Patreon. Don't forget you can support us on Patreon. Sorry, 1990. Well, it'll have to wait till next time. Support us on Patreon, patreon.com/AFLCrowCast. In the meantime, make sure you get around the other casts. Here We Crow had a good one tonight, and Sensible had a good one last night talking about the draft. So get around those. Support all the CrowCast podcasts. They're all great. In the meantime, stay safe, and we will see you on Sunday night for the wrap. Good night, everyone.